So I guess we'll make a start then. So yeah, as I said, thank you very much for kind of giving me the opportunity to bring this to life a little bit. As you can see on the screen there, I'm here to talk about voice, but actually perhaps turn it from something that you feel like is very futuristic and very difficult to impact and mold as a marketer into something that's actually very real world, very now, and actually very much about very much something you should be planning for right now. It's something I'm very excited about, and principally I'm not coming at this as a technology guy. I'm very much a kind of marketer, as Alexandra explained. I am very much into kind of how content can really build audiences, and it's the only way to build audience in reality. For me, we kind of built Zazzle, the agency that I founded, off the back of innovation in some respects in 2009. We built it around this content opportunity for desktop and mobile. And for me, voice is kind of the next big seismic shift. So I'm really excited about kind of how that's going to really kind of start to play into our hands as marketers. So that's kind of where this is coming from. It's also really, really important to realize how quickly this is coming, because historically we've kind of been used to almost a linear scale of innovation. If we look at how computers have evolved through Moore's law, if everybody knows about that, it's been very much a kind of linear scale, but actually there's a really powerful argument to say that it's actually coming much faster now. And one guy who I certainly have a lot of respect for is Google's chief engineer, a gentleman called Ray Kurzweil, and he talked actually way back in 2000 about how things are going to start getting faster and faster and faster. And we see this from this chart here, where looking at computing power and how that's kind of speeding up more exponentially. So, back in 2005, we developed a computer with the same kind of computing power as, let's say, a mouse's brain. But only a few years later, we're looking at actually being able to get it to human brain standards. By 2020, actually, computers are going to be as powerful as a single human brain. But then by 2040, we're going to have computers that are as powerful as every single human brain in existence. Now, that's phenomenal. And as you can see from the actual quote on that slide, 100 years, in the next 100 years, we're going to see 20,000 years of progress. So this is going to move much faster than any of us realize, which is why I'm so passionate about saying, let's get a plan together now. The big players, of course, know it. So Amazon, very well known through Alexa, Google through Home, we've got Siri, we've got Cortana, we've got Bixby, etc., etc. They're all piling in, and they're investing tens, if not hundreds of millions into getting this right, because they know that it's kind of the future of the computer interface, actually, a better computer interface than we've had before. The users are already starting to get there as well, actually, really interestingly. So Google, you talk to Google about it and they'll tell you that actually circa 20% of search queries are already voice, and they're expecting that to get to 50% by 2020. So you can kind of see how this thing's rolling really quickly. We're also using it for all sorts of different things, as you might expect, some of which we can impact, and I'll talk about this as a search marketer. But other things, perhaps not quite so much. But really interestingly, this has really been driven by the kind of millennials and the younger audience, which again is a reason why this thing will speed up as more and more of them get online. They'll be more au fait with actually interacting with computers with voice, as opposed to having to use this kind of Neanderthal kind of keyboard that we're all used to. So they're using it for everything from calling people to reading texts out to finding information, you name it, voice is being used. And as we see in a second, as the technology behind voice gets better, that's going to really kind of grow exponentially. It's not just about search, as I've kind of pointed out. It's, that is the kind of the centerpiece of what this is and how we're going to drive people to it, but it's about much wider. And if we look here at kind of current usage, you can see that kind of 50% of the usage currently is search related, but actually there's a whole world of other opportunity out there around voice. There will be people, of course, that are sat here watching, listening, saying, well, yeah, but that's great, but, voice is some way off. Actually, when I talk to Alexa, it's rubbish. Well, absolutely. We're not quite there yet. As I've explained earlier, we're going to get there really fast. And if you look at this in a different way, so looking specifically at voice, this chart shows us actually word recognition by machine. So if we look at 2010, we were only about 70% of the way there. Now already we're in the 90+%, which is a huge deal from many respects, because this is about computers understanding what we're saying and then delivering the right kind of, ultimately the right kind of message, the right kind of result. But that last 5%, let's say we're at 95% now, that last 5% is the most critical part of all. And the best explanation of this is actually a guy who I have a huge amount of respect for, again, a guy called Andrew Nang at Baidu, who kind of explains here that actually the difference between kind of almost there and there is absolutely massive, because that last 5% is where conversational kind of voice recognition actually happens and comes together. So you can not just have to really think carefully about what you say to Alexa and then get annoyed because it didn't understand. You talk to Alexa as if it's another human being. That's what happens in that last 5%, and that is why that's a game changer, and it's not that far away. Remember, we're saying circa 2020 here for that, so we need to be ready. Now, of course, very easy to think, you know, as always happens with these things, you know, that, oh, well, if voice is going to come along, then, you know, there'll be no place for anything else, and, you know, it will take over everything. That's never the case. You know, if you look at the history of kind of key innovations or key media channels, that, you know, TV didn't kill radio and radio didn't kill newspapers, everything will still have a place, but you just need to make sure that you're kind of optimizing your brand presence and thinking about your brand plan right now to make sure that you're taking advantage of it and getting ahead, I guess, of competitors in your space. So, big question, what do you do about it? You know, it's no good just talking about it and worrying about it. You've actually got to take action. So the next few slides, we're going to start to dig into that a little bit more to understand how you can actually start to think about growing actually voice market share, which is quite an interesting thing. So very simply put, to get involved in this as a brand or a business, there are two basic paths. So one is, at the moment, optimizing through search. The other part of this is optimizing or creating applications that sit and work on these specific kind of digital voice assistants. So in the case of Alexa, it's kind of skills. In the case of Google Home, it's actions. So they're the two different ways that you can kind of get on to Alexa or Home, so to speak. And to start understanding how you can actually affect that, you want to start looking at where they're actually pulling this data from. So here we can kind of see a few examples of that. Now, until very recently, and this is really interesting, Bing really was owning the kind of the voice market space. Now, actually, relatively recently, back end of last year, Siri actually moved over from Bing to actually start using Google as its kind of default search engine, which is obviously a big deal. Google, I imagine, paid a lot of money for that to principally ensure that they were keeping hold of market share. So 50% is still Bing, though, which is really interesting. So when you're thinking as a search marketer about what to do and how to optimize your site, your information, your content, you want to think very, very clearly about Bing as well, including that in the plan. Feature snippets, and we'll expand out on all of these. Really, really, really powerful now if they're not already, and obviously lots and lots of people talk about their importance, even in desktop and mobile, going to become absolutely critical in voice. Local, of course, is really important. So things like, obviously, local pack, really important, and testing that we've done really does suggest that that becomes key as well, because lots more voice results have some kind of form of location attached to them. And then Alexa, of course, really uses Yelp quite a lot as well for reviews and that kind of thing. So, you know, start thinking about the platforms that, you know, these kind of virtual assistants are using. And then, as I said earlier, you know, thinking about, well, do you need to build a specific application to help users answer different things? If we start to then dig into actually thinking about how we actually interface with this content, I guess, we actually talk differently, we ask different questions, we use different phrases. And we've done a lot of research on this already, and including reading a really interesting piece on Search Engine Watch by Jason here that you can see. And it looks at kind of how we're using the kind of different enablers to try and search. So we're using who a lot more. than we are perhaps how or where or when, for instance, which is really interesting. So you need to start thinking in a human way about the questions that they're asking, but how they're answering them as well, to make sure that you build content to match that opportunity. And intent changes as well, doesn't it? Because if you think about how you search for something, you might say, who sells the cheapest? Or how do I get to? Actually, those kind of things might actually be a little step away when they're, because normally if you type that in Google, you're very close to the point of conversion potentially. But when you're in the real world and you're using voice and you think about where people are using voice, obviously it's going to be big in cars, it's going to be big on mobile, all that kind of stuff, as well as in the home. It's actually whereabouts can I find the best? When does the show start? That kind of stuff is when people are about to exchange money. So you need to think quite differently about that kind of purchase funnel in this world. And of course, we will talk in a conversational way. It's a bizarre thing to say, isn't it? Because of course it's voice, but we've spent the last 20, 30 years teaching ourselves how to change our language to kind of be more efficient through the use of keyboards and through the keys, texting on mobile. So we've kind of almost lost the human element of how we're asking and interfacing with information. But of course, voice, particularly when the actual virtual assistants themselves are smart enough to understand conversation, then we start to move much more back towards natural conversation and how we talk, which means that phrases are going to get much longer. Makes sense, doesn't it? Because we don't, we type as efficiently as possible, whereas with voice, we don't have to do that anymore. So phrases get longer. So the long tail really is the new battleground as far as, us as marketers are concerned. That's where I think we need to do the hunting. That's where, when we're thinking about how we build out content, because remember, lots of the information, the answers that are coming through voice assistants are being pulled from websites. So you need to make sure that you're building out written content that sits in a really accessible way on your site to answer those key kind of conversational queries really succinctly. So how do we go about doing that? Let's kind of dig into that in a little bit more detail. So as I said before, featured snippets become your everything from a search perspective. So obviously already they're really important. And there's an example here of, I'm buying a lawnmower. That's very interesting of me, isn't it? But you can see here how, obviously already it's owning kind of mobile and desktop SERP space, real estate. So critical from that perspective. And I could talk all day about that. But in a voice world, there is only one result. So it's not like mobile, it's not like desktop where you might have this, but then you can scroll and get other results. Right now, the result is the result. It's the right answer. So if you're not claiming that feature snippet, and not all the time, but most of the voice assistants now are pulling the answer actually directly from the snippets. Not all the time, but most of the time. So if you're in that, you are the only answer. So there is no competition, which is why it's critical that you get in that space. And of course, you do that from building brilliant content and structuring it correctly. So we've done a huge amounts of work in the past kind of 3 years, probably, or slightly more around this. And these are some of the things that definitely help you do that. So you've got to rank on page 1, 99.9% of the cases. You've got to be in the top 10 anyway. So you've got to have a level of authority. You've also got to think about answering key questions really concisely. So you can build a page with a huge amount of information, but making sure that you're using good HTML structure to really mark out those key FAQs, those key questions in a really logical order that really kind of takes into account that user journey, which we'll talk about in a little while. Answering related questions together. So again, that's kind of pulling back towards this kind of user journey thought, so every thought you have is audience centric now. And even the use of great imagery, because again, that will be pulled through into SERP. And often if you do have great imagery, you have a kind of a better right to rank in that position. So making sure that you're really thinking about the imagery on that page as well. Ultimately building a really clean page with good structure that really thinks about what questions and related questions that user has. You do that, you've got a right to ranking that key position. It's very clear as well that the better you rank, the more chance you've got of that. So we've done a lot of research on our own clients and our own work around this, and you can kind of see in a bit of an example here that, you know, if you're in one position, then 30% of chance really of ranking for that snippet as well. But you can see that 2, 3, 4, and 5 still have the right opportunity if they are answering that key question better. So you really do need to be in the top 5. And of course, you need to be succinct as well. So if we see here, again, this is kind of research from our own work around kind of feature snippets. You know, we know that in general, and this is market wide, but in general, you know, you want to be answering that key question with it kind of within 45 to 53 words to enable Google to really cleanly pull that out. So if you could, you know, if you can look at kind of making sure that that happens, that would be great. So let's look at kind of an example of kind of how you bring that to life. So here we have a look at kind of work that we've done over a long period of time for a big kind of financial services site in the UK called Money Advice Service. Now, they got the opportunity really early. They were a great client around this, and you know, they understood that, you know, by really investing in great content on the site and really thinking about that from a user perspective and answering key questions and helping, then they're going to help, you know, ultimately rank better for these feature snippets. And they've claimed almost 3,500. In fact, that number could even be bigger now from doing that in a really solid way. Yes, they have authority and they've done all the kind of basic search piece right, but that's allowed them to build out a great content strategy that's really thought about the long tail, and obviously thought about how they're structuring that as well. So you can see here the stamp duty calculator, for instance. We've used really good kind of table markup to pull that information out in a really clean way. And of course, click-through rate as a result is really significantly increased. So over the piece, you know, we've generally seen an almost 120% increase in the traffic to each of those pages through organic. The difference between claiming the kind of the feature snippet and not. And of course, because you're really building the content out in a really user-friendly, user-centric way, and you're thinking about that user journey, of course, goal conversions increase as well, don't they? Local, of course, is huge as well. As we've kind of discussed already, the research that we've done and the you know, what we're seeing from it is that actually there's a lot more searches done with some kind of location-based intent. So traffic to location-based searches is going to increase through voice. And so we've started to think about, well, how can you really take advantage of that? Because everybody's going to be doing the same thing. So you need to think about how you're reimagining that opportunity. And one of the ways is really quite interesting, and it might save you from a fate worse than death, like this lady trying to fix her aerial on top of the windswept roof. You definitely don't want to be doing that. So what if you reimagine the local search opportunity in a different way and actually thought about building out something like precision booking, that, you know, if you're talking to Alexa and you're saying, right, okay, I really need to book this an aerial fix for next Tuesday. And you know, Alexa goes away, perhaps looks at a skill that your business has built as kind of, you know, an aerial business, and allows you through conversation to book a specific slot through voice. Now you can see John Lewis' example here. They kind of do it in a lightweight way on desktop, but imagine bringing that to life through voice. That to me feels like a really natural, user-centric, great user journey, great user experience way of really claiming local opportunity, because you're offering much more seamless and a much better service. So thinking like that could really help you win when voice really starts to take off. And of course, you can't win in every market. You know, if you think about flight booking, for instance, hugely competitive already. And, you know, from a voice perspective, you know, there's undoubtedly Google are going to want to play in that space because they own the kind of the interface, of course. And you might be a smaller business, a small travel business, thinking, how on earth am I going to compete with these guys, or the likes of Skyscanner, for instance? Well, why don't you think about, instead of trying to do it yourself and developing an app, for instance, why don't you look at how you can develop, you know, perhaps a relationship with those bigger businesses and actually optimize yourself through their kind of search facility. So have a much more visibility through kind of these comparison sites, for instance. That's the way that you can ultimately perhaps win by default through voice. So definitely worth thinking about those kind of affiliate relationships, definitely. And of course, think about those kind of really key trigger words, because voice is frictionless and should be frictionless. So you've got to make it as easy as possible to kind of get people to interact with you rather than somebody else. So think about the kind of words, the kind of conversations that are going to be happening around your product and service. You know, words like this, are they relevant to your kind of user journey? You've got to spend a lot of time in brainstorms really thinking about that and really developing personas in more detail than you have before to enable you to do that. So how do you pull it together? How do you kind of bring all that kind of thought process into one kind of cohesive plan? Well, here's a bit of an overview of kind of how we're thinking about it right now. And as I've kind of said to you, you know, the kind of the secret weapon, the Moab, the mother of all bombs, if you like, of this kind of opportunity for me, is that kind of user-centric user journey planning. And actually true of actually most of your digital marketing now. And we call that conversation mapping. So we now have kind of conversation mapping brainstorms to really understand exactly how and why and what and where our personas, our audience are having conversations. So if we go back to the lawnmower example that we talked about earlier, you can see here how I'm kind of working through a potential conversation around that particular purchase. And we want to be thinking about, okay, which elements of these things, this conversation, can we be adding value? Can we be creating content for? Can we be helping the audience? Because if we do that, we're much more likely to interact with them through voice. So conversation mapping, really, really important. And, you know, once you've done that process, you can kind of end up with a list of different types of opportunities. So you can see here that best lawnmower for 500 quid. Well, that's a guide potentially, isn't it? Rotary versus cylinder lawnmowers. You can see I know a huge amount about lawnmowers. I am very sad. Is another guide. But you could look at local search opportunities. You could look at that appointment piece that we talked about for people to come and see that actual lawnmower. So you can see here that you're building up this picture of this journey and optimizing it for voice. So talked about a lot today, I realize. So, and a lot of this will be new for lots of you. So what we have done on our site is build out a really simple kind of cheat sheet, if you like, to help you start to develop that strategy. You can find that via the URL down there. So I would, you know, really love to see some of you kind of downloading that and having a go. It is free, designed to help. And that's pretty much it. If you've got any further questions, obviously I'll answer some now. But principally, if you could kind of reach out on Twitter as well, I'm happy to kind of discuss, because, you know, I want this to be a wider debate, because I think the more marketers start to get involved in this space early, the better our kind of ultimate delivery will be in kind of solving this challenge.